I was very committed, and I was always what, unfortunately, in slang was termed a smartass. Everyone said, Mahua, there are sharks out there. They'll eat you up. It's dirty. It's corrupt. You don't know anyone. Your father's not an MP. It's impossible. Well, I had Rajnath Singh, the Home Minister of India, come to me in the Parliament lobby and tell me, "आपने बड़ा अच्छा बोला, पर वो तो थोड़ा गड़बड़ हो गया ना, आपने वहाँ से लिया था." I was an MLA before I became an MP, and I was perfectly okay addressing political rallies with 10, 20,000 people. I'm perfectly okay being in the assembly. I was perfectly okay being in parliament. But whenever I come into something like this, especially to a school, I'm actually, I think in my head I'm still 11 years old, and I keep thinking of assembly morning and when the days when we had school functions, and we were all asked to polish our shoes and make sure our white socks were just the right length and everyone should have behaved, and we had the check and we were sitting quietly and nothing goes wrong. So I'm actually feeling exceedingly nervous. So when I go in and speak to students or under a situation like this, I feel like I'm quite unworthy of it, and I feel quite nervous. So you'll have to bear with me. And when I was in school, I really fit the straight and narrow path. I used to always study academically. There was my sister and I. I was always, my parents never had to tell me to study. I was always very keen. If I came second instead of coming first, I'd go into a complete depression and cry and howl and do all of these things. So I was very committed. And I was always what, unfortunately, in slang was termed a smartass. I too, after class 12, wanted to go to the US to study. I didn't get any financial aid in Princeton, so obviously the choice for me was to go to Mount Holyoke, which was one of the 7 sister colleges in Massachusetts. I came from a very solid upper middle class stock. My parents were working, my mother was a housewife, my father was a working man, and we always had enough to eat and all of that, but the thought of my parents going to drop me or to kit out my room were things that were unheard of. It was obvious I would study on a scholarship. And while I was on campus, it was obvious that I would work on campus to pay for my, bills. So I got a campus job. I used to wash dishes my first year. And then after that, as you graduate, first year, everyone washes dishes in the US. So I went to work for JP Morgan. I worked in New York and London and a lot of other offices. And I was happy. I went back for my 10th reunion to my college, to Mount Holyoke. And most of us who had been in banking by then were senior vice presidents, about to become managing directors. All of us were earning very well, had good lives. A few of us had children, all of that. And I remember being in Mount Holyoke, and 99% of my class were exceedingly successful, but they were all homogeneous, if you know what I'm saying. They were all pretty much led the same kind of life. And I remember on the way back, thinking about this and saying, do I want to come back for my 20th reunion or my 25th reunion, being another managing director at JP Morgan, or do I want to come back having made a difference? So that's when I had the aha moment. Then I took a decision. I was 30 years old, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm going to go back, and I want to do grassroots politics in India. And I literally knew nobody. I knew nobody. And they say in politics that you need to have money, you need to have muscle, you need to have all of those things in Indian politics. Everyone said, Mahua, there are sharks out there. They'll eat you up. It's dirty. It's corrupt. You don't know anyone. Your father's not an MP. It's impossible. So a polling booth is the smallest, is the sort of lowest structure. So every village has 1 or 2 polling booths. So what we would do in the Youth Congress was go booth to booth and popularize the government schemes. So there are loads and loads of government schemes out there, but most people don't know about it. After a year, I joined the Trinamool Congress, which was obviously an offshoot of the Congress, because the Congress party didn't have very much left in Bengal. And I worked there, and I got a ticket to run from the Trinamool Congress as a member of the Legislative Assembly in Bengal. Now the seat I got was it's called Karimpur, and you can go and Google it. It's the very last seat in Bengal on the Bangladesh border. So my area has 122 kilometers of unfenced border. So you have a little rivulet running through, you Bangladesh on the other. Now that obviously comes with its own share of problems. I was the first non-left MLA to win the seat in 46 years. And it was a tough seat because it was, it's a border seat. You have arms smuggling, you have cattle smuggling, you have a lot of things that normally an urban constituency or South Delhi or North Delhi will not have. But it was fine. It was a real learning process. I did that for 5 years, and then I ran for parliament and came to parliament this time. is it difficult being a woman politician? Is it difficult being a woman in parliament? There are only 78 of you. There are only a little more than 600 women who have ever been elected to Indian parliament since independence. I'm one of a club of 600. I'm one of a club of 78 now. Is it difficult? And I always say one thing. I said, I don't think of myself as a woman. I think of myself as a politician. I think of myself, even when I was a banker, I think of myself as a banker. So whatever you do, think of yourself as what you're doing rather than let your gender define you.
So in today's time, do you think being a parliamentarian is a search for or a way to power and money? Or do you think it's a commitment to the belief that the representatives were elected upon?
I wish it was a way to power and money. I could do with a lot more power and a lot more money, I can tell you. Right? Definitely do with a lot more money. The amount they pay us. Anyway, but it is what you make of it. You can be a councillor. I have seen councillors and corporators and panchayat pradhans who didn't have houses, who were on cycles, and 5 years later they've got pakka houses with marble and are roaming around in, as we call in Bengal, char chakka gadis, right? And you've seen parliamentarians here, every 5 years when they declare their assets, they start off with 70 lakhs, and after a 15-year thing have an asset declaration of, 200 crores. So it is what you make of it. There are honest people everywhere, there are dishonest people everywhere.
Ma'am, there has been much discussion on two famous articles of the Indian Penal Code.
You put your book away and say, I don't want anything which your mother father has written for you. You say it from your own mind.
That is Article 499 and 500. It is believed that it contradicts the freedom of speech and expression. And
what is the Article 499 500?
The defamation law.
Okay.
Which makes defamation a criminal and civil offence.
Right.
So, and it obliterates journalistic freedom. So what are your views on this law?
And freedom of speech and expression, as everywhere else, is not a license to lie and destroy people's careers. You must understand this. I'm all for speech and expression, but unfortunately, media and journalistic standards in our country have fallen to an abysmal low. And I have absolutely no hesitation in saying this. I've said this before on record. I think, when we grew up, we would wait to read the editorial in the Statesman. We would wait to read the editorial in the Calcutta Telegraph. Today, when I look at the editorial, it's poor grammar. It's frightening. So when you have media ownership that is concentrated and you have strange links to government, then there is always a hidden agenda. So I think 498, 500 make very good sense in a world where there is true journalistic freedom and true journalistic ethics. In a world where there are hidden agendas and people are using journalists to bring down governments or to malign people's reputations, then I think there has to be some recourse to law. But of course, for example, I gave my speech, my maiden speech, and I used a poster which was in the Holocaust Museum, which talked of 14 different signs of fascism, right? I used 7 signs from it. I said in my speech, these are the 7 signs that I think are applicable to India, and I elaborated on each one of them. Primetime show, a 7-minute show, which said that Mahua Moitra has stolen her speech from an article by so-and-so in the US. Right now, what is it to me? I had Rajnath Singh, the Home Minister of India, come to me in the Parliament lobby and tell me, "Aapne bada acha bola, par wo to thoda gadbad ho gaya na, aapne wahan se liya tha." So people are believing that. So what is my recourse? Do I keep quiet and expect it to go and expect lakhs and millions of people in this world, even if 5% of them believe Mahua Moitra stole her speech? That's not something I want. So what do? I have to file criminal defamation. What else do I do? So sometimes I don't believe it as something that we need to do all the time, but given the lack of journalistic ethics in our country, given the great, I would say, sort of intertwining of a section of the government and media, sometimes there's no option left.